So the first scripture this morning is from the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verses 13 and 14. It's part of a longer story of a well-known story of Moses and the burning bush. That story where Moses running after killing an Egyptian soldier. Moses ran away. And while he was in the wilderness, he comes across this burning bush. You know the story, most of you. And God speaks to Moses and tells Moses to take off his shoes, and then gives Moses the job of going back to Pharaoh, back to Egypt, where he was running from, scared for his life, in order to liberate the people of Israel from their slavery. So Moses said to God in Exodus 3, "If I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what's his name? What shall I say to them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am." God said further, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you." The second reading is from the book of Ephesians in the New Testament, chapter 4, verses 4 through 6. There's one body and one spirit, just as you were called to the one hope of your calling, one God, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father over all, who is above all and through all and in all. And then finally from 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. You know, I've shared, at least in part, a part of this little anecdote before that I want to start with this morning, but not all of it. I'm going to share a little bit more of it. But many years ago, when I was first graduated from seminary and pastoring two little churches in northern Wisconsin, it was a two-point charge in Elko, Wisconsin, on Highway 45 in between Anago and Rhinelander. I'm sure some of you have driven through it, right? Yeah, there's no light or anything. If you blink, you know, you'll miss it. But there was a little UCC church on the highway across from the high school, and the parsonage next to it. That's where I was for 4 years. And the second church was a little south of that by Summit Lake, a little town called Kempster, which is 4 houses, a church, and a bar, which is also the post office. And one time when I was a pastor there, a young couple came to me, and the male in this heterosexual couple was from a very strict fundamentalist church tradition. And he said, well, I'll tell you why I'm here. I got divorced, and I'm not welcome in my church anymore. And people told me that you UCC people will take anybody. That's, you know, it's one of my favorite things about the UCC. If there's a little town in all these places in Wisconsin, for example, rural Wisconsin, there's often like a Missouri Synod or a Lutheran Synod Lutheran church. There will be a Catholic church for sure, and often then a little UCC church. And we get the people that are no longer welcome in the other ones if they didn't leave Christianity altogether. But he said to me, I'm kind of concerned though. I mean, what do you guys believe? It's important to me that you believe the right things. Because if you don't believe the right stuff, then you're not going to stand for anything. And this is the part you've heard me say before. My response to him was, no, that's what we stand for. That everybody is welcome. That everyone belongs. And he said, well, okay, here's the part that I haven't told you. He said, well, then what about the Bible? What about doctrine? What about Jesus Christ? What about sin? What about the cross? What about hell? So I was on trial all of a sudden. By the way, most of the times, whenever I meet a Christian who wants to put me to the test, at this point, usually what I say is, I can guarantee I'm not going to pass your test. Let's just, you really want, you want to have that conversation. But I said, we believe in the God of the Bible, and we're all about Jesus. Not because we believe other religions are wrong or that you're going to hell without him, but because we're so drawn to the love of God in Jesus. And we believe that God shows us in and through the life and the teachings of Jesus and the whole story of the Bible all the way through, that God loves us always, no matter who we are, no matter what we've done, or no matter what we've been through, and that God's always going to meet us right where we are and walk with us and guide us and help us get back on track if we're off track. We have deep respect for God and for commandments and laws, but we believe there's nothing to be afraid of when it comes to God. And we believe that God's grace is so amazing that God will always find a way to free us all from whatever it is that gets in our way, and that everyone's going to be welcomed home in the end. And that bothered him a little bit. I could tell it made him a little suspicious, but I could also tell it felt like a cup of cold water on a hot day. He said, "Can you back that up with the Bible?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I can." He said, "I heard you people don't follow the Bible." I said, "Well, some of us know it better than others. For some of us, it's not the primary way that we enter into an experience of God's presence, but it's very, very important to us in our tradition. We have Bible study. Come and see for yourself. Ask whatever questions you want to ask. Every Sunday in church, we read a Bible text, at least one, sometimes several, and then we explore what it means. No, we believe in the God of the Bible, which is different from saying I believe in the Bible, but that's another sermon." And then he said, as his eyes started to tear up, he said, "You mean if I came to your church, like I could get involved?" I said, "Yeah, of course." And then he said, and this made me tear up. He said, "You mean I could take communion again?" I said, "You bet." And then he said, "At the church I was raised in, if you get divorced, you can't take communion anymore. Because, well, you're a sinner." That's made me feel pretty bad about myself. And I said, "I'm so sorry that you've been hurt like that. We believe God's just a lot more understanding than that. We don't believe it's about being good enough to deserve God's love. We believe God is so good and God's love is so deep that God never, ever stops welcoming us and loving us. So we try to put that in practice." And then he said, "Could not right now, I know, but if I came and I worshiped with you for a while, could I have a role here?" That's how we put it. "Could I have a role here? Could I be one of the leaders of the church? You let divorced people be leaders?" "Yes," I said, not knowing at the time how much that yes would mean to me in my own life. And then he saw my guitar in my office. And he said, I play guitar and sing, mostly in bars now. But music's my thing, man. And I used to love to sing some of my songs. I make up some songs. I used to write little songs and we'd sing them in my church. It was my ministry. If I become a part of your church, would I be able to share my music sometime in worship? And I said, well, I'd be disappointed if you didn't. And then he just lost it. He said, man, that really hurt me when they told me I couldn't sing in church anymore. Made me feel really ashamed. And I said, God will always welcome the sound of your voice, even if you can't sing well. But yeah, whatever gifts you've got to bring, you're not only welcome, but encouraged to share them with the church. We need everybody sharing their gifts in order to be a church that's fully alive. Well, the guy really did have an amazing voice, and it's a true story. And he sang for us many times. He and I are still friends. You know, lately it seems that a number of people I've been around are wondering, struggling actually, with just who or what or where God is. So I wanted to touch on that just a bit in today's message. And obviously it's a huge topic, so I'll just barely chip away at it as usual. I got 3 points, trying to limit myself. And as you'll see, we're not even going to get to the third. But the 3 points are, first, sometimes it helps to know what God is not. Second, it's okay, maybe even good, not to know. Sometimes. And third, think about love and gardens. So first, it helps to know what God is not. Part of why I shared that opening story is that it underscores the simple fact that one of the reasons why so many people struggle with God and what I'll call churchianity is because of the ways in which God has been presented and often forced on us. I've touched on this lots of times, but I just want to encourage you to keep letting it go. If there's an understanding of God that takes you into a place of shame or fear. In fact, I think we all need to learn or develop the capacity to recognize what I'll call a shame spiral. It's that feeling of not being enough, of being wrong or being bad. That guy had it very obviously, being told, you can't have communion, you can't sing in church. Shame, bam. For a lot of us, it's way more subtle than that. Learn to recognize when you're in shame. And my point is just simply, that's not God. God is not taking you there. I agree with my beloved Richard Rohr. Shame is never of God. Guilt, maybe for 5 minutes to get your attention, to get you back on track. Beyond that, no. But when you notice the shame spiral, see if you can get some clarity as to what's really going on. Just pause. Shame. I know that feeling. What's that about? What's really going on? Maybe it's some old church message. Maybe it's the good old family of origin, how you were raised, parenting. I mean, we've all got stuff that kicks it off. But see it for what it is. Ask God for the grace to let that go. And then to get curious, what's really going on? Explore that a bit and then get excited. And here's why. Because chances are God is inviting you to let go of an old understanding that no longer is serving you. an old habitual way of getting hooked by shame or guilt that's not good for you and it's not helping you get where you need to go or get more free. Let it go. Get excited. Something new is on the way. And in addition to shame, the other thing God is not is a head trip. God is not first and foremost an idea or a concept or a mental picture. God is not a doctrine. God's not someone or something that you'll ever have figured out or be able to make sense of in some nice, tidy way. And that leads to my second point. It's okay, maybe even good, not to know. If you feel confused about God, or you're struggling with who or what God is, or how to know God, I know that can be hard. But it's okay. In fact, it's more than okay. It's a necessary and healthy part of the process of spiritual growth. It's more of a problem to be too sure that you know. And this is where the text from Exodus speaks to us this morning. When Moses had the burning bush experience and God told Moses to confront the Pharaoh of Egypt and to lead the people of Israel to freedom, Moses said, in essence, this is impossible and rather crazy thing you're asking me to do. Who shall I tell them sent me? Who are you? What's your name? And that's when the voice in the burning bush said, I am. Tell them I am sent you. And Moses said, oh, that's helpful. No, I'm kidding. But that's as specific as God got with Moses. When Moses asked, who are you, God? As some have suggested, it was God's way of saying, don't try to define me. I am and always will be more than you can know. In fact, more than you could handle if you could know. Makes me think of, the Tom Cruise, A Few Good Men. You can't handle the truth. God says to Moses, just trust me. I am going to be with you. I am the one who is leading you and the people into freedom. I will be with you. I will give you what you need when you need it. Trust. So who is God? God is the undefinable mystery who's always with us and who is relentlessly, lovingly, but firmly leading us into freedom. The one who is, or the mysterious energy that is, through the power of love, setting us free from every form of bondage, individually and collectively. And our task is just to stay in touch with the presence and the flow of that mystery as best we can. Now, in our morning devotion group, Mondays through Fridays, I have often shared readings from one of my favorite spiritual teachers, theologians named Barbara Brown Taylor. Dr. Taylor is an amazing person and an incredible preacher. Before she became famous, she was the pastor of a small little Episcopal church in rural Georgia. The sanctuary had room for only 85 people, so it was smaller than our sanctuary. And the church started to grow, in part because she was an amazing preacher. Somehow in the late 1980s or so, she was named one of the top 12 preachers in the United States in some major publication that, people that care about that stuff read. And all of a sudden, people started coming from all over the country to this little church in the middle of nowhere to hear Barbara Brown Taylor preach. And it overwhelmed the little congregation. Busloads of seminarians were coming from Atlanta to learn from this renowned expert preacher, and they grew to having 4 services every Sunday. Barbara became exhausted. The church started to argue over how to provide hospitality for all these visitors, and the church split over whether or not to expand their building to accommodate all the people coming to hear Barbara preach. The whole thing exploded, and Barbara lost her faith in the process. she had a faith crisis as a result of the mess of what happened. And she wrote about it very powerfully in a book called Leaving Church, which I highly recommend. But that only, of course, made her a famous writer and theologian. But here's what's written in an article I found. Barbara is reluctant to discuss the details of that painful chapter of her journey. She says preachers too often fall into exhibitionism, and she wants people to face their own rocky journeys in their own ways. In her book about that time, Leaving Church, she takes nearly all the blame for the breakup. It resembled, she said, a lover's quarrel. But the loss of faith, as she knew it, was devastating at times. She said, God felt gone altogether. I can't say for sure when my reliable ideas about God began to slip away. But the big chest I used to keep them in is smaller than a shoebox now. After years of teaching other people what words like sin, salvation, repentance, and grace really meant, those same words began to mean less and less to me. But since the religion I know has a lot to say about losing as a precondition for finding, I can live with that. More recently, Dr. Taylor has written a good deal about the power and importance of darkness, of learning to be in the dark. We often speak of the light, she says, but there are gifts given in the darkness, literally and metaphorically. And times when things are not so clear, or perhaps they're clear, but in a different way. And I think we need to develop an understanding of what I like to call endarkenment instead of enlightenment. With all that in mind, she deliberately walks at night. And during a recent late night jaunt, she looked heavenward and realized that the important thing about the stars is not the naming, but the noticing. I love that. The important thing about the stars is not the naming, but the noticing. She said, I like to think of the millennia of people who have watched them and named them before us. It kind of fights against the ego. If you're in the dark, she says, it doesn't mean that you have failed and that you've taken some terrible misstep. For many years, I thought my questions and my doubt and my sense of God's absence were all signs of my lack of faith. But now I know this is the way that the life of the Spirit goes. I've learned to prize holy ignorance more highly than religious certainty, and to seek companions who have arrived at the same place. We're a motley crew, I'll admit it. Sometimes distinguished more by our inability to explain ourselves to those who are more certain than we are. But in many cases, we also find that we're more distant from the center of our faith communities. I'm almost done with this part. I'm almost done, period. In the 1990s, Dr. Taylor became a university professor, and she wrote an article about the relationship between science and Christian theology. And that made her more famous still as an expert on the exploration and the interface between scientific methodology and theology. And she talks about how quantum physics have completely changed her understanding of who and what God is. Sometime I'll share more about that. But here's one quick little taste. She says, after talking about the amazing mystery of quantum mechanics and how everything is really connected energetically to the universe, I've come to this conclusion. These days, I see God as whoever or whatever it is that connects everyone and everything. God is the energy of connection, the unseen light and love between us, within us, and in all things, that holds everything together in a unity that is beyond us. It's not enough for me to proclaim that God is in the unity. or responsible for it. I want to proclaim that God is the unity, the very energy, the very intelligence, the very elegance and passion that makes it all go. The only thing I can think of better than that is the name God revealed to Moses, I am who I am. All right, so I said, I don't have time for the third point. Think about love in gardens. Here's all I'll say. The Bible tells us that God is love. So just keep coming back to that. Don't make it any more complicated than that. Only the ego needs it to be more complicated than that. Oh, ask whatever questions you got to ask. But God is love. Come back to that. And God is more like a garden to grow than a riddle to solve. I actually think I came up with that at some point. Cultivate it. The garden of your spiritual growth, cultivate it. Be the best gardener you can be. But then keep reminding yourself that the mystery of growth, well, whoever, whatever is the energy of that, of a plant busting up through the cracks in the sidewalk, whatever that energy is, reaching for the sun, that's God. And, all that's just a good place to start. So my 3 points, you got them? Sometimes it's good to know what it's not. Sometimes it's okay, maybe even good not to know. Think about love. Think about gardens. Let's sing our closing song.